With that, I want to move on to the next clip, which is the Fox News Memos clip. So these were the famous memos which we discovered with Outfoxed, and I will never forget the day, kind of like maybe a bad detective movie, when I had heard that there were these memos. Someone had reached out to me, and she agreed to meet me in a hotel lobby, literally in a kind of disguise, with a manila envelope. And the person sat down. We recognized each other with hand signals. I'm not so great at the detective stuff. And they slipped me this manila folder. And, I said, thank you. I tried to engage in conversation. They said, look, I'm terrified. I'm scared. Goodbye. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And we're gone. And then immediately started opening the memos. And literally, I thought I was going to hyperventilate right there in the lobby when I saw what they were. So with that, let's show the memo section, please.
I suspect your research has discovered the memoranda that were written by John Moody and by Roger in terms of setting the tone for the day. The message of the day is a very political device.
Let's spend a good deal of time on the battle over judicial nominations, which the president will address this morning. Nominees who both sides admit are qualified are being held up because of their possible, not demonstrated, views on one issue, abortion. This should be a trademark issue for FNC today and in the days to come.
There was nothing covert about the way the managing editors in New York or Washington operated. They made it perfectly clear what they expected from us.
The so-called 9/11 Commission has already been meeting. This is not what did he know and when did he know it stuff. Do not turn this into Watergate.
Every morning there was a detailed list of subjects to talk about, not talk about.
Kerry's speech on the economy at Georgetown is likely to move onto the topic of Iraq. We should take the beginning of the Kerry speech and see if other news at the time is more compelling. It is not required to take it start to finish.
They were just actually issuing edicts to the reporters to control what they could say and how they could say it.
Let's refer to the U.S. Marines we see in the foreground as sharpshooters, not snipers, which carries a negative connotation.
When headquarters sent a memo every morning and said, we want to touch on the following issues, we want to cover the following stories, we want to do them in this particular way, our job and our objective then was to execute the plan.
The pictures from Abu Ghraib prison are disturbing. Today we have a picture, aired on Al Arabiya, of an American hostage being held with a scarf over his eyes, clearly against his will. Who's outraged on his behalf?
Outfoxed came out 7 years ago, and Brave New Films has been on the case for 7 long years now, and it turns out that it's even worse than we originally imagined in that movie. New memos have come out that show you exactly how biased Fox News is. Here, let me share some examples with you. In November of 2006, after Democrats won the elections, Fox News senior vice president John Moody said, the Iraqi insurgents must be thrilled at the prospect of a Dem-controlled Congress. And he told his reporters and anchors to report that, which of course was fantasy. There was no such thing. But nonetheless, Martha McCallum went on the air that night on live news and asked about, quote, reports of cheering in the streets on behalf of the supporters of the insurgency in Iraq, that they're very pleased with the way things are going here, and also with the resignation of Donald Rumsfeld. Totally made up and makes it on with no basis in fact whatsoever. Later, Bill Salmon, Fox News' managing editor in Washington, during the 2008 elections decides to emphasize Obama's, quote, affinity to Marxists.
Now that the words Marxist and socialist are being thrown around out there in the news cycle, I thought it was interesting to go back and revisit what Barack himself said about Marxists and socialists in his book. And it turns out he was drawn to Marxists and socialists as a young man.
And guess what happens? Hey, look at that. It's Martha McCallum again. In October 27th of 2008, co-anchor Martha McCallum on Fox's Live Desk comes out and asked about Obama's connection to socialism and Marxism.
Socialism has been one of the biggest words we've heard tossed around in the past couple of days. Your thoughts on how they're both fighting and waging this war over the best way to solve this economic crisis, Bill?
When you start talking about spread the wealth around, which is what Barack Obama said to Joe the plumber, and now this new radio thing that came up today where he talks about redistributing the wealth, you know, those two things come together are tantamount to socialism.
This is how they do news over there. It isn't news, it's absolutely propaganda. Here's what Moody said about George W. Bush, quote, "His political courage and tactical cunning are worth noting in our reporting through the day." And of course, that's exactly how Fox News reported it. In fact, during the Iraq War, and this is really disturbing, here's a direct quote from one of Moody's memos. He says, quote, "Do not fall into the easy trap of mourning the loss of U.S. lives." They pretend to be patriotic over there, but they are no such thing. They are a total propaganda outfit for the Republican Party, and if the Republican Party costs some U.S. lives in a disastrous war, doesn't matter. We will cheerlead that war. We will call it political cunning and courage, and if there are U.S. lives lost, we will not mourn them. Those are the memos that come down from so-called Fox News. In 2009, more memos come out, and this time again, it's Bill Salmon. Hey, you know what? The public option polls really well. But if you call it a government-run option, it doesn't poll as well. So all of a sudden, here come the memos raining down on their so-called news anchors. Salmon's memo says, please use the term government-run health insurance, and when brevity is a concern, government option whenever possible. And he says, if you're going to refer to it as a public option, call it the so-called public option. And he says, quote, let's not slip back into calling it the public option. So what happens? Same night, special report, Washington newscast, so-called news anchor Brett Baer says, we are going to, quote, take a look at the fight over government-run health insurance, when the night before he'd been calling it a public option. All of a sudden the language changes because the news actor got a new memo from the so-called heads of news. And Chief Washington correspondent Jim Angle referred to a government insurance plan that night. And just to top it off, he gave the second part of the memo as well. On air, he said, the so-called public option. They do not do news over at Fox News. They do propaganda for the Republican Party. It is very clear from the memos we've gotten inside. It was clear during Outfoxed. It's become even clearer since then. It is simply another arm of the Republican Party.
And thank you, Cenk, for not only that, but all of the terrific work you and the Young Turks are doing and continuing to do. Again, another example of the importance of independent media. The Young Turks are a key point in being able to create video, to follow the news, to give a point of view about the news, and to connect the dots, which is, after all, one of the most important things that we all do. In a world with so much information and, frankly, so many crises, the ability to connect the dots and create a narrative and create a way that people can understand the world is what the Young Turks and the Nation and the Alternate all have in common.